Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and Indian Perspective on All India Radio. This is Gaurav Sharma and with me is VC Pramod bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Deputy Secretary of State of the U.S. Wendy Sherman begins her 3-day visit to India. French President Emmanuel Macron holds talks with visiting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Facebook blames configuration changes to its routers for Monday's blackout. 5th edition of India-Japan Maritime Bilateral Exercise to begin in the Arabian Sea from Wednesday. 3 scientists share the Nobel Prize in Physics for their studies of complex phenomena. And in the IPL, Mumbai Indians beat Rajasthan Royals by 8 wickets in Sharjah. As the nationwide free COVID-19 vaccination campaign at government facilities for those above 18 years is underway, we advise our young listeners to get vaccinated and help others get vaccinated. We also advise our listeners not to lower their guard as COVID-19 remains a threat to our health. Please stay at home unless it is essential to go out and continue to follow these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki doori for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. For any COVID-related information and guidance, contact the national helpline numbers 011-2397-8046 and 1075. And now, news in detail. The Deputy Secretary of State of the U.S., Ms. Wendy Sherman, is on a 3-day visit to India from Tuesday. On her visit, Ms. Sherman will meet Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla on Wednesday to review the India-US bilateral agenda and the outcomes of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent visit to the USA. They will exchange views on regional issues pertaining to South Asia and the Indo-Pacific region and contemporary global issues. Ms. Sherman and Mr. Shringla will also participate in a special session of the India Ideas Summit on Wednesday organized by the US-India Business Council. The Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, will call on External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar and the National Security Advisor Ajit Doval. The Ministry of External Affairs said Deputy Secretary Sherman's visit will be a useful opportunity to continue the regular dialogue and further strengthen the India-US Comprehensive Global Strategic Partnership. French President Emmanuel Macron on Tuesday held talks with the visiting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. This is the first high-level meeting between the 2 nations since the AUKUS deal controversy. The deal, which led to the scrapping of a submarine contract with Australia, plunged relations between U.S. and France into crisis. Earlier in the day, Secretary Blinken met French Foreign Minister Le Drian and addressed to close consultations as President Biden and French President Macron agreed in their September 22nd phone call. A statement from the U.S. State Department said that the 2 sides also agreed to remain in close contact on Afghanistan and discuss the importance of holding the Taliban to its commitments. They also discussed the Indo-Pacific and the Sahel region. Both highlighted the importance of US-EU cooperation during France's upcoming presidency of the Council of the European Union, strengthening the NATO alliance, US support for European security, the climate crisis, and the need for success at COP26.
Facebook has blamed the configuration changes it had made to its routers coordinating network traffic for Monday's blackout of its services. Facebook's Vice President of Infrastructure, Santosh Janardhanan, in a post said that the disruption of network traffic had a cascading effect on the way the data centers communicate, bringing its services to a halt. Monday night, Facebook and its affiliates WhatsApp and Instagram faced disruptions, leaving millions of its users in the dark. Facebook later apologized in a tweet just as the app started to go back online. Facebook's rivals, however, benefited from the social media giant's shutdown. According to reports, WhatsApp's rival chatting apps Signal and Telegram saw tremendous jumps in downloads worldwide. China sent 56 fighter planes towards Taiwan on Monday, the largest ever show of force in a single day. According to Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense, Monday, the sortie included J-16 fighter jets and H-6 bombers, among other aircraft. Taiwan has been complaining for more than a year about China's Air Force repeatedly flying nearby. In response, China accused Washington of provocative behavior while warning against supporting Taiwanese independence. Our Beijing correspondent reports that the Mainland Affairs Council, MAC, Taiwan's top China policy-making body, accused Beijing of seriously damaging the status quo of peace and stability in the Taiwan Strait and demanded Beijing to immediately stop its non-peaceful and provocative actions. Responding to recent stories by Chinese fighter jets, the U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price said that the U.S. is very concerned by China's provocative military activity near Taiwan, which is destabilizing, risks miscalculations and undermines regional peace and stability. The U.S. urges China to cease its pressure and coercion against Taiwan. China's Ministry of Foreign Affairs responded on Monday saying that the U.S. selling weapons to Taiwan as well as U.S. ships navigating the Taiwan Strait was provocative action that harmed U.S.-China relations.
In Romania, the government of Prime Minister Florin Chitu was brought down by a no-confidence vote on Tuesday. According to reports, the result of the vote showed 281 members of the parliament voting in favour of the no-confidence motion, with none against, as the government and its allies boycotted the poll. The political crisis comes as Romania battles a deadly fourth wave of coronavirus. The fifth edition of India-Japan Maritime Bilateral Exercise JIMEX between the Indian Navy and the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Force will be held in the Arabian Sea from Wednesday. The JIMEX series of exercises commenced in January 2012 with a special focus on maritime security cooperation. The last edition of JIMEX was conducted in September 2020. JIMEX 21 aims to develop a common understanding of operational procedures and enhance interoperability through the conduct of a multitude of advanced exercises across the entire spectrum of maritime operations. Multifaceted tactical exercises involving weapon firings, cross-deck helicopter operations, and complex surface anti-submarine and air warfare drills will consolidate coordination developed by the two navies. A statement from the Defence Ministry said that naval cooperation between India and Japan has increased in scope and complexity over years. JIMEX 21 will further enhance the cooperation and mutual confidence between the two navies and fortify the long-standing bond of friendship between the two countries.
The 8th edition of the India-Sri Lanka bilateral joint exercise Mitra Shakti commenced on Tuesday at the Combat Training School Ampara in Sri Lanka. The 2-week-long exercise is being conducted till the 15th of this month. The Indian Army contingent comprising 120 personnel of Infantry Battalion Group and a similar strength from a battalion of the Sri Lankan Army is participating in the bilateral exercise. Over the next few days, troops will train, share and rehearse tactical drills to undertake joint counter-terrorism operations in a semi-urban rural environment under United Nations mandate. Senior military observers and dignitaries of the Indian and the Sri Lankan armies will be witnessing the validation phase of the exercise. The exercise provides an ideal platform for both contingents to share their operational experience and expertise while also being instrumental in broadening the interoperability and cooperation between the armies of India and Sri Lanka. Prime Minister of Denmark, Ms. Mette Frederiksen, will be on a 3-day visit to India from the 9th of this month. During the visit, Ms. Frederiksen will call on President Ramnath Kovind and hold bilateral talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi. The visit by Ms. Frederiksen will give both sides an opportunity to discuss the entire gamut of bilateral relations and review the progress in the implementation of the Green Strategic Partnership. Both sides will also discuss regional and multilateral issues of mutual interest. During the virtual summit held on 28 September last year, India and Denmark had established a Green Strategic Partnership. The Danish Prime Minister would also interact with think tanks, students and members of civil society. India's External Affairs Ministry said the visit is expected to further strengthen and enhance the close and friendly ties between India and Denmark. This is All India Radio giving you the news. For quick news updates round the clock, follow us on Twitter at AIR News Alerts.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on the menace of terrorism and proxy wars, its implications and strategies to counter them. In conversation are retired Commodore C. Uday Bhaskar, a security analyst, and Simran Sodhi, a journalist.
To Today we are discussing the topic of proxy wars and terrorism and how to curb them. Also, we will discuss how proxy wars and terrorism, especially when it is state-sponsored or it becomes a state policy, how that undermines the authority of a state subject. Commodore Bhaskar, we have seen how proxy wars are being carried in various parts of the world. We have seen terrorism in almost every corner of the world today. How do you see this factor playing out when we look closer home at the state of Jammu Kashmir and also recently what we are seeing in Afghanistan?
If we were to do macro review of the challenge of terrorism, particularly after the withdrawal of the US military and the Western alliance from Afghanistan, which was in the end of August this year, I would say that as a security analyst, the whole region, that is the Southern Asian region, which encompasses Afghanistan, Pakistan, and those proximate parts of India that have been affected by the terrorism that's been emanating from here, it has become more turbulent. It is latent at this point in time, but there is a fair amount of animation, which is cause for concern if you are an official who is in charge of state security, particularly in relation to the challenge posed by terrorism. And I would say that this is currently applicable to all the states in the Southern Asian region in the first instance. But by extension, I think it is something that could be applied across the board to large parts of Asia, as also Europe, North America, Africa, which have been differently scarred by the scourge of terrorism. So in summary, I would say that post the US withdrawal from Afghanistan and what we are now seeing, for instance, even in Afghanistan over the last few days, we saw the attack by groups that are affiliated to the Islamic State and the fact that the Eidgah Mosque in Kabul had been attacked and subsequently the Taliban had to carry out an operation to destroy what they have described as an Islamic State cell, the IS and a cell of the IS, is, I think, indicative of multiple ironies. That the Taliban, which had been associated with this kind of terrorism, is now talking about mounting an operation to remove a group like the IS, the Islamic State, which is now embedded in Afghanistan and carried out an attack on a mosque. I mean, this is what I mean by multiple ironies. Simran?
Commodore Bhaskar, as you pointed out, what we are seeing in Afghanistan is a complex situation because, as you had mentioned about the Taliban, for a very long time, the Taliban were a terrorist organization. Even today, many countries are recognizing them as such. But we see a reversal in the roles in the sense that the Taliban today also control the state of Afghanistan. And we have other terrorist groups that are operating in Afghanistan. And we also had the US Joint Chief of Staff saying that the Taliban is reviving Al-Qaeda. It continues to maintain links with these terrorist organizations. Do you feel what a lot of analysts have been writing, that Afghanistan is then likely, or there is a danger that this becomes a place which is so unstable it could become the perfect launching pad for terrorist activities, not just in the region like India, but globally also?
Well, definitely I would say that currently the internal or the domestic situation within Afghanistan is cause for very deep concern. From all the accounts and reports that we are able to piece together, there is a looming crisis in terms of basic humanitarian aid and relief. And the reason for this is that during the long global war on terror, when we had the United States-led operation in Afghanistan, the citizens of Afghanistan were very, very dependent on the aid and the relief that was being provided by the external aid givers, the donors. Now, all that has stopped and it's been disrupted. So existing channels for distribution of basic necessities like food, like medicine, like education, there were various NGO projects, some under UN aegis and some independently that were operating. They have all been disrupted. So as a result, if you look at the reports emanating from Afghanistan over the last few weeks, ever since the Taliban has taken over, there is a great deficit of governance. Now, along with that, you will recall that there were reports even by the senior-most officials who were involved with the Afghan banking sector and the finance sector at the highest levels, saying that the situation has actually toppled, that it has gone beyond the point of being able to be restored with aid being provided again. So these are all very alarming. Now, in this kind of an environment, all the assessments by different intelligence agencies, because I think it bears repetition that what you have just identified is the US view, but every intelligence agency that is directly affected, and this includes a country like India, it includes a country like Iran, Russia, China, they're all differently concerned about the terrorism that is likely to be directed against them from Afghanistan, or with the support of Pakistan, which has had a certain interest in nurturing the Taliban and other groups. And today we hear the same kind of refrain that Pakistan itself is concerned about the TTP, which is the Pakistani variant of the Taliban, and what is likely to happen there. So it's in this context, I would say that the current situation in Afghanistan is exceedingly turbulent. I'm using the same word again. And this is likely the probability, if I could put it that way, of terror groups, like for instance, the Islamic State that carried out the attack on the Eidgah Mosque. I mean, why did I say it's ironic that you have Afghanistan declaring itself as an Islamic emirate? It has said repeatedly that we will now be guided by Islamic law, the Sharia. And yet you have a group like the Islamic State, Khorasan, or some other affiliate, which has actually attacked a mosque. So what is the inference that one can draw? That these terror groups are operating in a manner where if they see an opportunity, they would exploit it cynically and ensure the highest level of bloodshed that is possible on innocent citizens. And this is something that the whole world is concerned about. Today it is Kabul Eidgah Mosque. Tomorrow it can be elsewhere. So that is the reason why I say that without sounding or, without trying to cause any alarm, the need to have much higher levels of alertness and a response mechanism that will preempt, because it is not enough to have investigations after a terror attack. I've said this many times, including on All India Radio. It is the need to acquire credibility by which you can preempt and prevent, so that the citizen has confidence that the state apparatus is able to protect them from this spreading virus of terror. Simran?
Commodore Bhaskar, when we discuss the proxy wars and we discuss terrorism, especially in our region of the world, one country that we study carefully is the role of Pakistan. We've been seeing how Pakistan has been using terrorism as an instrument of state policy in Jammu and Kashmir. We had the NIA raids recently there and drones were captured. We have seen what is happening in Afghanistan. We have seen the deep involvement of ISI in Afghanistan. How do you assess, one, the role of a state like Pakistan, which exercises these proxy wars, terrorism as a state policy, and how do countries then deal with a state like Pakistan?
Well, first of all, I think we need to acknowledge and recognize that Southern Asia has a very complex kind of footprint and experience when it comes to state support or endorsement of terror groups and terrorism. Now, the traditional kind of recall is that when we had the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, that was the beginning of this particular form of terrorism that we are now talking about and dealing with, which is enabled by this religious fervor and the standard trope or the image that we often recall, especially as far as those who studied the scourge of terrorism in South Asia and Southern Asia are concerned, is the image that President Ronald Reagan then in the United States used to often talk about this courageous and totally committed mujahid, which is that of very often an Afghan man who almost looked like Osama bin Laden, with the Kalashnikov rifle in one hand and the Quran in the other. And the whole kind of software was that it was seen as a case of picking up the gun, the rifle, to save your religion. I mean, that is how the Afghan Mujahid were motivated. And Pakistan played a very major role in the madrasas of Pakistan in providing this kind of what I would call as training. And then, of course, there were many countries who were involved in enabling, and the Pakistani ISI had a very major role to play. And they also received very large amounts of money and weaponry. And beginning from there, I think the Pakistani deep state, as it is called, acquired a certain proficiency. And from an Indian perspective, I would say that what has been most challenging for us is the way in which Pakistan also introduced the nuclear weapon, which is that Pakistan had acquired nuclear weapon capability in a covert way. You recall the whole AQ Khan episode. And Pakistan began to use nuclear weapons to enable terror, which in the literature is called as NWET, Nuclear Weapon Enabled Terror. And it is from then onwards that Pakistan became identified with the use of terror as state policy. Much of it was directed against India. But we know that they had also used Afghanistan as an arena for various political and military objectives that they had set for themselves. So how do we deal with this combine of Afghanistan and Pakistan is now, I think, the very big challenge. We do know from recent experience that it's not easy. And the United States and the Western alliance, the military alliance, are a very good example of how wrong things can go if you do not make the appropriate assessment of the nature of the challenge. And I think for the United States, it's doubly tragic. If you look at the amount of money that had been spent by the US over 20 years from 2001 to 2021, the number of lives lost, not only by the US, but by all the people who are involved, including the Afghan citizens. And this is a price that is still being paid. So I think we need to be very objective about the nature of the challenge. And this goes for all the current players in the Afghan arena, primarily countries like China and Russia, as also Iran, maybe Turkey, that now see themselves as more effective interlocutors after the US withdrawal from Afghanistan. Simran?
Commodore Bhaskar, as you pointed out that there are these actors that now are more involved in Afghanistan, Turkey, Iran, Russia, China. Pakistan, of course, is there. Do you feel that with so many states now kind of trying to get a foothold in Afghanistan or trying to have their own interests protected, do you fear that Afghanistan could become the stage where we see proxy wars being played out in the near future? And also how that affects India's security in the region?
Well, the short answer is yes, Simran. I wish I was not so definitive. But if you look at the current pattern of different stakeholders and their investment within Afghanistan, unless you have credible governance in Afghanistan, I think it would be very difficult for the Taliban or any other government that may be finally allowed to emerge to deal with this challenge. Because if you look at the topography, the geography of Afghanistan, it is not easy to govern at the best of times. And if you look at all the neighboring issues, with neighboring countries, all of them related to this religious fervor and to terrorism, there are different layers, which is why I also said that this is multi-layered. I mean, there is one whole subset which is related to Pakistan alone. Then there is Iran. Then there are the stans, particularly when you look at Uzbek and its own interface with Afghanistan, and the anxiety from China about what they see as the Turkmen groups, and ditto with Russia. So meaning that just the geography, the political geography of Afghanistan itself is very daunting. Add to that the geographical, I would say, topography and those challenges. So we have to acknowledge that many of these countries that are in the region and some non-state entities have already acquired a certain foothold. When we talk about, the Taliban is talking about an Islamic State cell. That should give you an idea about what is already embedded in different parts of Afghanistan, depending on which is the most proximate terror group, which is very active, and what are their own stakes. So I think making an assessment of different groups and different players, many of them are dormant. They have a ability to revive if required, depending on the nature of the politics and the religious contestation. And there is also, I think, a tribal and socio-ethnic component which is also embedded. So that is why I think we need to have, first of all, a very objective assessment about what can emanate from Afghanistan and the kind of ecosystem that has grown over the last, I would say, 10, 15 years, particularly after the removal of Osama bin Laden, when I think there has been a certain rearrangement of leadership roles and objectives that are to be pursued. Simran?
And we will continue our discussions on terrorism, proxy wars, and we will continue to follow the developments in Afghanistan and how the Taliban is running the country and how the challenges of terrorism pose a threat to India. With these comments, we bring today's discussion to an end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Three laureates share this year's Nobel Prize in Physics for their studies of complex phenomena. The Nobel Prize website in a statement said that Shukuro Manabe and Klaus Hasselmann laid the foundation of our knowledge of the Earth's climate and how humans influence it. Giorgio Parisi is rewarded for his revolutionary contributions to the theory of disordered and random phenomena. Shukuro Manabe demonstrated how increased concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere led to increased temperatures at the surface of the Earth. Klaus Hasselmann created a model that links together weather and climate, thus answering the question of why climate models can be reliable despite weather being changeable and chaotic. Around 1980, Giorgio Parisi discovered hidden patterns in disordered complex materials. His discoveries are among the most important contributions to the theory of complex systems.
Moving on to sports, in cricket, Mumbai Indians registered a massive 8-wicket victory against Rajasthan Royals at the Sharjah Cricket Stadium tonight to stay alive in the race to playoffs in the ongoing IPL. Put into bat first, Rajasthan scored a paltry total of 90 runs for the loss of 9 wickets in the stipulated 20 overs. Opener Evan Lewis was the top scorer of Rajasthan with 24 runs, while David Miller was the next best with 15 runs. And now a report from the business world.
The BSE Sensex climbed 446 points or 0.75% to trade at 59,745. The NSE Nifty surged 131 points or 0.74% to trade at 17,822. Among global markets, Asian shares logged a broad sell-off following the overnight decline in US stocks. Majority of the Asian stocks weakened for a third straight session as investors feared oil prices hitting multi-year highs would add to inflationary pressures caused by supply chain disruptions. Japan's Nikkei 225 index plunged 2.2%, South Korea's Kospi declined 1.9%, and Singapore's Straits Times fell 0.7%. Trade did not take place in China's Shanghai Composite Index, while Hong Kong's Hang Seng managed to add 0.4%. European markets were up in intraday trade. Brent prices rose to trade above the $82 per barrel mark, while U.S. benchmark crude prices were close to the 2014 peaks. In intraday trade, Brent crude was trading around $82.40. Back home, gold prices fell 160 rupees at multi-commodity exchange for October contracts, in sync with losses in the international markets. The precious metal was trading at 46,710 rupees per 10 gram. On the other hand, silver lost 80 rupees to 60,870 rupees per kilogram for December contracts when reports last came in. At the forex market, the rupee weakened 14 paisa to 74 rupees and 45 paisa against the US dollar. Anubha Rohadgi for World News, All India Radio.
And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Guardian says Taiwan president warns of catastrophic consequences if island falls to China. The Globe and Mail writes Afghans who worked for Canadian military still waiting for rescue from Kabul safe house. Financial Times reports China unloads Australian coal despite import ban amid power shortage. The Wall Street Journal writes U.S. trade deficits widens to record in August as imports rebound. The Washington Post reports deadly historic tropical cyclone Shaheen departs Oman after devastating flooding. And the Sydney Morning Herald says Australia on the cusp of a zero-emission iron ore deal with South Korea. And now a quick look at the headlines once again. Deputy Secretary of State of the U.S. Wendy Sherman begins her 3-day visit to India. French President Emmanuel Macron holds talks with visiting U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Facebook blames configuration changes to its routers for Monday's blackout. 5th edition of India-Japan maritime bilateral exercise to begin in the Arabian Sea from Wednesday. 3 scientists share the Nobel Prize in Physics for their studies of complex phenomena. And in the IPL, Mumbai Indians defeat Rajasthan Royals by 8 wickets in Sharjah. India is celebrating the 152nd birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan, Vaishnav Jan, by artists from South Africa.
Vaishnav Jan do tene kahiye je peed parai jane re par dukhe उपकार करे तो ये पर दुखे उपकार करे तो ये मन अभिमान नाने ने वैष्णव जन दो तेने कहिए जे पीड़ पराई जाने सकल लोकमान सहुने वंदे निर्दान करते.
And with that, we end this bulletin. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.